President Trump's risk-taking with North Korea has a lot of people raising their eyebrows. Well, more good news tonight that North Korea will now suspend its nuclear and missile tests until this summit starts, whenever it is, wherever it is. The president heard that news and tweeted this out. North Korea has agreed to suspend all nuclear tests and close up a major test site, at least for now. A good sign and good news for North Korea and the world. Big progress, exclamation point if you're listening on satellite radio. Look forward to our summit. Now, Fox's Trace Gallagher heard this news and said, I'm sticking around. I'm going to help you with the show, Brian. So, Trace, tell us what's going on. This is more good news. I'm not, high-fiving yet, but this is some good signs.
It is good news, Brian, but history shows that anything coming out of North Korea should be taken with a giant grain of salt. But in this case, Kim Jong-un is trying to up the ante by saying that he plans to stop nuclear testing and that he plans to offer proof. North Korean state-run media released the following statement from Kim, quoting now, from April 21st, North Korea will stop nuclear tests and launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles. The North will shut down a nuclear test site in the country's northern side to prove the vow to suspend nuclear tests. Going on to say that a nuclear test center, quote, will be discarded in order to ensure the transparency of the nuclear test suspension. Now, the statement makes no mention of North Korea abandoning its existing missiles and nuclear weapons, so there is, of course, room for skepticism. But remember, Kim Jong-un has not tested a missile since November, and at that time he was embroiled in this name-calling game of chicken with President Trump. So for now, this appears to be a major concession by the North and a major victory for the president. And it precedes what could be a historic summit next month or in early June between Trump and Kim. It also comes one day after North Korea dropped its demand that U.S. troops leave the Korean peninsula. And that came in the wake of that stunning revelation that Secretary of State nominee Mike Pompeo actually visited North Korea over Easter and met with Kim Jong-un. Experts point out this is also an indication that sanctions have had a crippling impact on the North, and even Kim Jong-un now says that he wants to focus on his economy and focus on his people. We'll see. Brian.
Yeah, I mean, we've down this road before, but never quite like this. Trace Gallagher, thanks so much. And keep in mind, too, North Korea and South Korea are going to have a summit week. They're going to talk about officially ending the Korean War. Now back to tonight's other big story, and it's a major one, the Jim Comey memos. Now, we now know what's in those memos, and now the Justice Department watchdog also knows what's in those memos, and now he wants to investigate whether two of them have leaked classified information on the inside of them when he gave some of those memos to his good buddy at Columbia just uptown here, who was at the Justice Department. Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is trying to stay up with this, but man, this book tour is getting quite interesting, isn't it, Catherine?
It is, Brian, and thank you. Fox News confirms that Comey is under investigation by the Justice Department's internal watchdog, the Inspector General, for leaking the memos, whether he mishandled classified information, as well as his communications outside the FBI, including reporters. The memos show the relationship between the president and Comey was difficult from the very beginning, after Comey briefed Mr. Trump about the dossier's unverified claims just 3 weeks before the inauguration. Those who support the president say the memos show he wanted the Russia claims investigated. With Comey writing, the president said it would be good to find out, but that he hadn't done anything and hoped I would find a way to get out that we weren't investigating him. President's critics say another memo shows he crossed the line when he talked with Comey about a loyalty pledge. Comey wrote, I replied that he would always get honesty from me. Trump paused and said, that's what he wants, honest loyalty. I replied, you will get that from me. Of the 15 pages of memos, 8 contained classified information at the secret, which is highly sensitive, or confidential level. And that seems to be at odds with Comey's congressional testimony after he was fired.
My thinking was, if I write it in such a way that I don't include anything that would trigger a classification, that'll make it easier for us to discuss within the FBI and the government, and to hold on to it in a way that makes it accessible to us.
But in this very first memo in January of 2017, Comey knew his conversations with the president were sensitive and not public information. I am not sure of the proper classification here, he wrote, so have chosen secret. Please let me know if it should be higher or lower than that. So tonight we have a serious investigation by the Inspector General at the Justice Department and another apparent conflict between the documents and Comey's testimony, Brian.
And it's, you can't say this is political or President Trump's DOJ. It is an inspector general appointed by President Obama,
That's
correct?
correct. That's correct.
Catherine, great job. You make it sound so simple, but yet we know it's really complicated.
I appreciate
Thank you.
that. Okay.
Meanwhile, straight ahead, have a great weekend, Catherine. Comey spoke about leaking the memos during the interview with George Stephanopoulos earlier this week. The interview that never ended? Take a look.
The president's tweeted innumerable times calling you a leaker. Well, what's your response to President Trump?
Look, it's true. I mean, I'm the one who testified about it. That's how people know about it. I gave that unclassified memo to my friend and asked him to give it to a reporter. That is entirely appropriate.
Really? In what world? The Wall Street Journal's editorial board member, Kim Strassel, one of her latest columns is she talked about the questions that she wants James Comey to answer. First off, is it right for him to have leaked that memo? And his reasoning is bizarre. He says, I needed to get the information into the public square. What is this, 1778?
Yeah, hi, Brian. And no, of course it's not appropriate. This is a man who has nailed to the wall numerous people from his perch at the FBI for having mishandled classified information, for leaking. He talks in his memos about how he tells President Trump he wants to go after the leakers, make an example of them. And just because Jim Comey decided that he was entitled to take these documents, which arguably, by the way, are FBI property, they were in his possession, and then decide that he alone is entitled for the public interest to leak. Everyone who leaks has some sort of motivation like this, and it doesn't justify what he did.
He had 4 memos out. 2 of them they're taking another look at. Meanwhile, his deputy, Andy McCabe, clearly is in trouble. He told multiple lies, so he's going to be skewered. We're going to find out if the criminal referral will result in charges. But looking at Comey in particular, I have a little problem. For example, his pull-aside in the Oval Office. That is very similar to the pull-aside in Trump Tower. If you have a new person into politics who's used to running a major organization and wants to have a confidential conversation, if you know more about how it's done, how about this, Jim Comey? Instead of jotting it down after you leave, hey, Mr. President, no offense, I'm sure you don't realize I shouldn't really be one-on-one with you. Let's get somebody else in the room for your own, just so you don't have a problem later. There are so many ways to avoid the problem. Instead, we hear about the voice in his head, and he writes in longhand, and we eventually get a best-selling book.
There does seem to be almost a sense of entrapment in these memos, as though he was urging the president to do things so that he could then run back outside and write down the bad things the president had done in his mind. And by the way, the double standard here too, Brian, I think is glaringly evident. Jim Comey tells us in his book and on this tour about the doubts he had about Loretta Lynch and her judgment, some of the orders she gave him. But do we have any conversations between him and her that were memorialized? Absolutely not. So, I mean, and there's a lot of other things that come out of this memo too. I think we're finding as well that Jim Comey, he likes to talk about how he's just a facts guy, but again, only the facts that matter. And once we're seeing the context of a lot of these statements that have been wafting around in the press for the last year, it turns out there's a very different reading of this than the one that only Jim Comey was giving us up until now.
It's unbelievable. I just think that if he had any brains in his head, one interview and get off the stage. The more he talks, the more news unfolds, the more he backs himself into a corner. And now his battles with Andy McCabe, because they both can't be telling the truth because both their stories diverge. Kimberly, I look forward to your next article. I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, the memo news sparked a Twitter response from the president for a change. I didn't even know he had a Twitter account. James Comey memos just out and show clearly there was no collusion and no obstruction. Also, he leaked classified information. Wow. Will the witch hunt continue? Jonathan Turley's a lawyer. He knows the answer to that, and a professional professor of constitutional law at George Washington University, which is over $70,000 a year. I looked at that, and they don't offer much aid.
It's a deal.
Okay, it is a deal, but you're there, so it makes it worth it. So what do we learn now, Jonathan, that we didn't know before this book published that has you really intrigued?
Well, it confirms many things that some of us have been saying. You know, for over a year, he's had many supporters who have been saying things that I think are facially simply unsupportable. One of them is that these were some type of personal diary, that they were his personal notes. He continues to maintain that, and that's facially ridiculous. I mean, if you look at these memos, they're not to him. They're not memos to the file. They're memos to other FBI officials. And he's actually stating in one of the memos how he wants to do the preliminary classification and giving it to these other officials for their input. These are not personal records. But also the FBI itself has said this is FBI material. So you have someone who was fired as the director of the FBI, removing 7 documents from the FBI, 4 of which were deemed to have classified information, and then giving them to a friend for the purpose of leaking them to the media. That's a very serious set of facts, and it doesn't exactly speak to the ethical leadership model that Comey has been, a proponent of.
So when President Trump sits there as the businessman turned brand new politician and says, what's going on with Comey? He's a leaker. What's going on with McCabe? He's a liar. What's going on? I think there's a bias at the FBI. Piers Strzok, Lisa Page. Yes, 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 and yes. His instincts were right on this.
Well, I think that when it comes to Comey, many of his criticisms have been borne out, as with McCabe. Now, it doesn't mean that the president hasn't made his own mistakes, but he's been blessed by the critics that he has inherited. And I think that with regard to McCabe, it's a very strong argument for a charge. It's the very case that he and others brought against Flynn. He was part of that investigation initially. His situation seems more serious. But with regard to Comey, there's other problems with this. One is, why would he give this to his friend? What we now know is that various FBI officials had the document. So this wasn't going to be destroyed. He knew it was going to go to investigators. It was already in the hands of investigators. But instead, in giving it to Congress or leaving it with the investigators, he chose to give it to a friend to leak to the media. Why? It wasn't going to help the investigation. It was going to hurt it because he just told Trump these documents exist. What is the answer, it seems, is that it was to his advantage, and that's why he did it.
And because the president acted angrily in their one-on-one sessions and asked for certain things, he assumes that means he's guilty, or Democrats assume that thinks he's guilty. Actually, that might be a human reaction. They accuse you of cavorting with prostitutes. That could become international news. And by the way, the worst news is your wife could find out. And he expressed that in the one-on-one meetings, and that emerged. Also, he said, pursue any satellite problems or anybody that worked with me. And he writes, I assume that meant people that worked for him that may have colluded with Russia. Follow that path. That really didn't get out until these memos were public.
Well, I think that much of this is now going to be public, and we're going to, for the first time, see a complete record. But one of the more interesting aspects about Comey's conduct with regard to these memos and his book is that he seems to have put the investigation into a secondary position. Running a tell-all book while the investigation's ongoing and you're a principal witness is not helping the investigation any more than leaking those memos were. They helped Jim Comey.
Jonathan Turley, we have to tax you almost every day into your legal knowledge in order to keep up with an investigation that is like no other. Thanks so much, sir.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Before Comey was under investigation for leaking classified information, he was criticizing Hillary Clinton for doing the same thing.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information.
So how ironic is this? Robin Biro is a Democratic strategist, was with the Clinton campaign for a while. Robin, what do you think about these new revelations about how the Inspector General has a problem with some of the classification and the use of James Comey's memos?
It's really hard to wrap my brain around this. Just honestly, Comey's fall from grace has been stellar because this is somebody who was widely regarded on both sides of the aisle until the 2016 elections. And now, as a veteran Army Ranger who served with Ranger Regiment, I was awarded a top secret security clearance. I know very well everything that goes into that and the responsibilities that carries. He seems to me too smart of a man to make a mistake like this. But then again, so did Hillary Clinton. Well, not a man, excuse me. But, I just can't understand how people like this get into these situations when they know full well the responsibilities that having that level of clearance carries with it. So, honestly, I have trouble even processing this. It's hard to believe honestly. And I have to wonder if he's just trying to sell books, or if this is made up, if this is part of this crazy deep state conspiracy theory stuff that I constantly hear thrown around that no one can really explain to me. We don't use that term on the Democratic side. But, you know, it's just all a lot to try and wrap my brain around, Brian.
You know, he never really had a relationship with Hillary Clinton. He talked about trying to meet her once. It never didn't go so well, and maybe he had a negative feeling about something he did in his background. But in the end, what he has to be transparent about is his relationship with Loretta Lynch. To be honest, it would alleviate a lot of the mystery into why he acted the way he acted. Just come out and say, I couldn't trust that Justice Department. That's why I did it. I was up to Hillary Clinton deserves the criticism for having Uma Abedin put that emails on her laptop. That forced me to act. And then it's game on. Then we can debate it. But I can't get to the point where we debate it because he talks circuitously about his thinking where he contradicts himself in the same answer.
Yes, and that's the problem. And Americans just want to know the truth. We want to know what happened here, and we're not getting straight answers. People are getting mad. You know, I know the DNC just sued, and really, it's so hard just right now. There's so much conflicting information going on. Honestly, I wish this investigation would just wrap up so that we would find out what's going on and just get to the truth of the matter and put politics aside. We're all Americans. None of this just seems to be panning out to me and making sense, and especially Comey right now, I just can't understand. You know, he even said that he wouldn't have brought the charges against Clinton the week before the election because he thought she was going to win. So as a Democrat, that blew my mind because
it makes no sense. And then he said politics didn't enter, but politics entered. Got to go.
Clearly.
Robin, I mean, you're wrestling with it outwardly with us, helping the show get better, but the same way I do, too. I can't make sense of it. The one thing is pretty clear. The left and the right agree he's not making much sense. I don't really know where his constituency is, but he has sold almost 1 million books. Robin Byro, thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
Meanwhile, the conservative legal watch group, Judicial Watch, just filed a new lawsuit, get this, involving Jim Comey and Special Counsel Robert Mueller. They want their communications with each other. Are they out there? We'll find out.
Tucker.
I knew you'd come to me eventually. Former FBI directors Jim Comey and Robert Mueller have a long history of working together. Both are key players in the investigation into President Trump and Russia interference, if it indeed happened, in the 2016 election. But have they been coordinating with each other? Good question, right? That's what Tom Fitton wants answered. He's the president of Judicial Watch and has to sue now to get that answer. Tom, what are you after here?
We're after everything. But more specifically, we want to know about what Mueller and Comey were up to as it relates to these memos. We had already sued for the Comey memos, and the Justice Department told us, well, Mueller has them in his files, so you can't have them, which was a big lie in the sense that they gave them to Congress. But we want to know what Mueller and Comey were up to in that regard. We already know that they colluded on the testimony that Comey gave last year that talked about the memos and was an anti-Trump tirade. And, you know, Mr. Mueller's investigation would not be here but for that illegal leak by Mr. Comey through his friend to the New York Times, a leak that's now under criminal investigation or one step away from being under criminal investigation. You know, Mr. Comey has a lot to worry about. Mr. McCabe has a lot to worry about. But Mueller, he wouldn't have an investigation but for those two men. He's the one who's running a zombie investigation because everything's collapsing around him. The memo show there was no Russia collusion. Trump did nothing wrong. And the one who did something wrong was Comey, and Mueller isn't even targeting him.
So, Tom, you're wondering if it wasn't just the Columbia professor that got those memos dropped off to him. You're wondering if Comey dropped those memos right up to Robert Mueller.
And did Comey get the blessing of Mueller to go around and start talking about the memos to Congress and using them in his book? I mean, we've also sued for the FBI and DOJ to figure out how it is that Comey was allowed to use this material in his book. It was either private or classified or confidential, and he shouldn't have been able to use it. And Mueller certainly had to have been involved in blessing that operation. You know, Donald Trump has a lot of enemies, and it's Comey, it's Mueller, it's the deep state and the FBI and DOJ, and it's Andrew McCabe. And two of those people are facing jail time. You know, the irony, just quickly, Brian, is that Comey is in the same legal boat as Hillary Clinton right now. The mishandling of classified information is a significant legal liability for him, and it was for her. And you have to wonder whether he exonerated her because he was doing the same exact thing.
You know, it was so quick, Tom. It was, okay, I'm fired. I wrote memos, put them in the New York Times, Robert Mueller. It happened so rapidly, you wonder, well, how did that take place? Now, a year later, forensically, we're going through it, and he did something illegal to make it happen. And you wonder how many of those pieces were in place before the trigger was pulled with the memo drop. So it is going to be quite intriguing. I just don't think these higher-ups in the intelligence divisions in law enforcement ever thought there'd be somebody pushing back like Trump and others were on this. They usually get away with a lot of this at the highest levels.
Comey's a bad actor. The DOJ, FBI, and Mueller need to come clean about its communications and dealings with him after he was fired.
All right. Tom Fitton in the morning often doesn't wear a tie, but for a Tucker Carlson show, he does. That is respect, young
Evening
man.
wear.
Thanks. Have a great weekend. Sounds like he's going out after. All right, straight ahead. Hillary Clinton's self-pity tour is the show that never ends. It continues. You're not going to believe the quote that is in this brand new book. I saw myself on the monitor, so I'll speak now. Hey, we're just 6 months away from the new election, but Democrats are still obsessing about 2016. Today, get this, the Democratic National Committee sued the Trump campaign, the Russian government, and WikiLeaks, accusing all of them of conspiring to disrupt the 2016 election. They're not the only ones still living in 2016. According to a brand new book by New York Times reporter Amy Chozick, former First Lady and two-time failed presidential candidate Hillary Clinton acknowledged on election night that she wouldn't win, saying, quote, "I knew it," only in a woman's voice. "I knew this would happen to me. They were never going to let me be president." She also bellyached how many people disliked her, saying, quote, "You know, I'm getting pretty tired of hearing about how nobody likes me. Oh, what's the point? They're never going to like me." I like Ethan Bierman. He's a Democratic strategist. Ethan, we have a lot to talk about. First off, this Tom Perez-inspired DNC lawsuit against those entities. Is this the stupidest thing you've ever heard?
Absolutely not. We did it in 1974 against Richard Nixon as well, and one that ended up being a settlement, $750,000.
To who?
If somebody does damage to your computer servers, shouldn't they owe you money to fix that? It costs millions of dollars to the DNC.
You have a Robert Mueller investigation. You have an agenda to get forward. Tom Perez has his hands full making sure the midterms is a blue wave. Having a Russia investigation, a double Russia investigation, don't you think that's the last thing the American people want to see, especially when the Democrats are saying Robert Mueller should be left alone? This is a comprehensive investigation with a bottomless pit of funds to research.
Yeah, there's also something called statute of limitations that they needed to file suit on before those expired. So normally, you're right, they would wait until the criminal investigation ended with Robert Mueller. But in this case, when you look through the series of torts and charges that are filed, I read the entire filing. There are statute of limitations. They needed to file now. This is an appropriate time to do so. And by the way, remember, a civil suit has a different standard for evidence. You just had Tom Fitton on versus a criminal suit. This is just about the preponderance of the evidence. Plus, what's really important for the DNC here is the discovery phase. They can find out all kinds of great things that they can use in the
Robert
midterms
Mueller's
as well.
not doing much discovering. He's got 19 indictments out there. He's cutting deals left and right, going around the globe. He doesn't discover anything. We're about to find out it all. But here's the other thing. If you look at Senator Schumer and others, they know the thing that's going to get more Democrats is going to be coming up with a cure, fixing health care. The thing that's going to get more Democrats handling our debt and deficit. That's getting in touch with the American people. And I notice that they've kept a low profile on this. They seem to get it. The other thing is it's going to highlight the fact that the DNC were told by the FBI, and they should have been more forward. I'll give you that. Someone hacked into your computer. There's something in your system. The Russians are in your system. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the worst director of a major political party in history, in my opinion, didn't do anything. They didn't let it happen. So the Russians nested in there. They never turned over the server. Now, the FBI should have been more forward, but it also highlights the Democrats' negligence because they were alerted early. That's got to bother you.
Well, of course, Deputy Wasserman Schultz should have addressed it more quickly. However, if somebody breaks into your house and is committing a crime therein, that needs to be addressed. And that's what ended up happening. Over hundreds of servers, hundreds of computers needed to be completely wiped and fixed, install new operating system. Somebody should pay for that. The Russians are behind it. Right. WikiLeaks could be part of this. The Russian group behind it. And if somebody from the Trump campaign, because remember in this case we have Donald Trump Jr. named, Roger Stone, among others, if those bear out, they should be financially responsible with treble damages. I fully support it.
Ethan, just so you know, they have Discovery too. Game on. So let's move on. Amy Chozik's book, Chasing Hillary, 10 Years, 2 Presidential Campaigns and 1 Intact Ceiling. Among the quotes to emerge, they never were going to let me be president. Why does everyone hate me? These are the type of things that bring the DNC down. Tell me what's going on in DNC circles. Does this help or hurt your case?
Well, I mean, look, those quotes themselves, when they're standalone in the way that they're being presented, of course, it doesn't sound good. But anybody who's going to run for president, win by 2.9 million popular votes, lose the Electoral College by roughly 60,000 votes if they had swung, that's a tough way to lose. That hurts. It doesn't feel good. And that's what she was expressing that night. I can't blame her for not feeling good about that. And you wouldn't either. If you ran for president and lost like that, that's a tough way to lose. But you're right. Looking forward to 2020 or the 2018 midterms, we're looking for some fresh ideas, fresh blood, and there are a lot of people within the Democratic Party who are stepping up right now.
Well, a couple of things. I want to download all of her excuses. I ran out of toner, so I had to quick start the show. It's been incredible. I give so much credit to people like Al Gore, who had his heart broken, never complained again, just would have some fun with it on talk shows. And then you have Richard Nixon, who knew there was something uneasy about what happened in Illinois. He said it was better for the country to move on. I wish Hillary Clinton would read those biographies. Thanks a lot, Ethan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, straight ahead. Conservative radio host Dennis Prager says the New York Times is deliberately keeping his most recent book, which is excellent, off the bestseller list because it's about Christianity. He is here next, unless my rundown is very wrong. Hi. Conservative radio talk show host Dennis Prager says the New York Times bestselling list is deliberately keeping his book off the bestseller list because it has conservative themes. The book is titled this, The Rational Bible, Exodus. Did make the Wall Street Journal's bestseller list and is currently one of the best-selling Christian books on Amazon.com. The New York Times contests this with Prager's accusation, saying this, according to their PR team, hypocrisy alert. Dennis Prager wrote a dishonest essay about our bestseller list. He claims, quote, I have long known it isn't a bestseller list, and I don't pay attention to it, though he lists New York Times bestselling author on his Twitter bio and his own site. The Times says that its bestseller list is based on an analysis of book sales that very few retailers disclose sales of Prager's new book, so they don't have maybe the correct numbers. Dennis Prager upset about this and is not laying down about it. Dennis, what could be done about this?
Well, first, good to be with you, Brian. By the way, I did not get the yellow tie memo as the previous guest did, so I feel bad. I just want to apologize.
You could still have time to change. I know that's a clip-on.
Fair. Good. Well done. I just want to make something clear. It's not a Christian book. I'm a religious Jew. It's a commentary of the first volume of my 5-volume commentary on the first 5 volumes of the Bible. It's for everyone, Christian, Jew, Buddhist, atheist.
Yeah, I know. It's great. You were on Fox and Friends talking about it.
That's right. This is the Rational Bible. That's what it's called. And I want that to be clear because of what was implied. Okay, so here's the very, very quick story. It is about my book, but it's not about my book. It's about the New York Times bestseller list. It's not a bestseller list. I don't say this with any anger. I say it, though, with certitude. It doesn't tell what the best-selling books are. And they admitted it in the 1980s when they were sued by the author of The Exorcist. And they said it's essentially editorial content rather than just a list of best-selling books. And generally, people have known that religious books and conservative books don't do as well, even when they are selling well. In my particular case with the Rational Bible, it is was number 2 last week on the Wall Street Journal, number 2 in Publishers Weekly, number 1 one on Ingram. Ingram is the biggest wholesaler to bookstores in the country, and number two on BookScan, which is provides or monitors 75 to 85% of the books sold. So that it doesn't even appear on the New York Times bestseller list is a real puzzle.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre. Right now, there's two conservative books that we checked out. Number 11 is Secret Empires of Peter Schweitzer, and you got number 12, Jerome Corsi's book, is a conservative book, Killing the Deep State. So it's on there. When you have those numbers, I know a little bit about the book business, and if you're on Publishers Weekly and you're ranking high on BookScan, you're usually in that list. And I just find it hard to believe that you can't get BookScan and others to give you numbers to go up to the New York Times and say, hey, look, tell me who sold more.
Oh, we have the numbers. It's not a puzzle at all, and it still doesn't matter. They tell you that they're like Coca-Cola. They have a secret formula, and they don't want the world to know how they derive their numbers. And they don't include Amazon. And my book, Open, is the second best-selling book of all books of all varieties when it opened up on April 2nd. And even then it didn't appear on the New York Times bestseller list. How is that possible? And I'm only using it, I'm not a victim, I'm not whining. I just want people to know what I have known, and many conservatives and many especially religious writers know, it's not a bestseller list. People should understand that, and then we can move on.
Right, but you're now moving on and you're fighting about it, so you want people to be accurate because it does bring a sense of prestige to the New York Times bestseller list. You admit that, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. That's why I'm not, they said I'm a hypocrite. First of all, I'm not a hypocrite. I wrote in my piece, I use that term. I am a New York Times best-selling author. Of course I'll use it. It helps sell books. Doesn't make me a hypocrite. On the contrary, it makes me honest.
Dennis is fighting the good fight for all those who publish books and want to get on that list and want to make it a fair list. I know it's a great book. As I had a chance to read it, grab it with two hands. It is quite heavy because he worked very hard on it, but it's worth the lift. Dennis, thanks so much. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
All right, meanwhile, straight ahead, it's time for the final exam. See if you can beat our experts at remembering the news of the week. That story is next. Make the music louder and throw in a commercial. It means Mark Stein did the test. He proctored it. And here's what Mark Stein looked like yesterday doing the test.
Hey, you know what that music means? It's Final Exam, where we discover who at Fox has been paying attention to the news. Before we begin, though, let us take a quick look at last week's exam, which was a fiasco, as soon as Tucker asked about Her Majesty the Queen.
Which member of the royal family had the world in hysterics this week when he or she jokingly compared a noisy helicopter to Presidents Trump and Obama?
Queen, what's her face?
Everybody knows Diamond and Silk, including Jeff. All right, congratulations. A sitting U.S. senator to do this while in office.
You didn't wait for him to finish.
Since we have a technicality, we're going to throw in one bonus question. What is the capital of Burkina Faso?
Can I chime in for sexual pandas?
How does it feel?
Jeff, that was amazing. Thank you for joining us.
Who? And you thought Steve Harvey, Miss Universe, was a fiasco. You thought the Oscars at La La Land was a catastrophe. His name is actually Brett, and hers is Katie, but I'm going to keep up the tradition and call him Jeff.
I like that.
And I'm going to call Katie Queen What's-Her-Face, which I take which I take personally. These are Jeff masquerades as Brett from Fox News Headlines 24/7. We brought them back for a rematch. We had problems. The International Quiz Show Arbitration Committee in Geneva said this won't pass muster. Brett Larson's back along with Katie Freight, editor-in-chief of the Daily Walkthrough. Let's get to the questions. Hands on buzzers. I'm going to ask the questions, and the first one to buzz gets to answer. You must wait until I finish asking the question. Each correct answer is worth 1 point. Get it wrong, you lose a point, and the best of 5 wins. So let's get started. Question 1. This week, after a 33-year drought, an American woman won which U.S. sporting event? Let's go to Brett.
The Boston Marathon.
Well, let us see. Roll tape. Let's see.
Desiree Linden becoming the first American woman to win the Boston Marathon since 1985.
Fantastic. So that's, you got that, Brett.
Well, I'm
is
so
ahead.
fast, I jumped the gun last time.
No, that was terrific stuff. Question two. This week at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., a baby animal was born. Big news, because he's part of an endangered species. So what kind of animal is he?
Where's Steve Irwin?
Well, it's
when we
not
need
a
him?
panda.
Well, we know. He's getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame posthumously.
Think of a simian.
This is terrible. Why does this happen every week?
A simian is not a ruminant. That's coming up later. But a big monkey.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep.
What do you have to do?
She's going again. She's going for the guess.
An orangutan?
An orangutan. Highly specific, but is it correct? Roll that tape.
Oh, baby. A new star is born at the National Zoo after a western lowland gorilla gives birth. Mother and baby doing just fine. As the video, they're bonding birds up the internet.
They're so cute, though.
Yeah, that's a western lowland gorilla. Nothing like
Western
an orangutan.
lowland gorilla.
So Brett is still in the lead over Queen What's-Her-Face. Question 3. There's a new condiment in town, and folks seem to be very divided over this. Heinz is releasing a pre-mixed mayonnaise and ketchup product for your summer barbecues. But what are they naming this lethal combo? Brett.
Ketchanaise.
That is a fantastic name, but is it correct? Let's see.
Mayo chip. I can't even say it correctly. Mayo chip. This is a combo of mayonnaise and ketchup. Heinz is caved after people complained on Twitter. Heinz tweeting, quote, "We heard you saucy Americans. We're bringing you our version of the duo that you've been already eating for years."
You were so close.
I had it the way that they should have called it. Listen to me, Heinz.
I'm with you. Ketchanaise over mayo.
So much better.
Yeah,
Mayo chop.
Hold the mayo chop. And let's go with the Ketchanaise. Joe Biden.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
Joe Biden, question 4. And Brett is taking the commanding lead here. So it's Jeff over Queen What's-Her-Face. Question 4. Joe Biden isn't the only member of the Obama administration considering a 2020 run for president. Which other member of the Obama administration confessed this week he's also thinking of running? Brett.
Nope, it's going to Queen. What's her name?
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes. Sorry, I don't want any more. It's Katie.
Eric Holder?
Let's see if you're right.
Back on the board.
Earlier this week, Holder said this about a possible run.
You are considering it. Yeah, I'm thinking about it, but I've not made any determinations. I'm focusing on the work I'm doing with the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, trying to deal with gerrymandering.
So the score right now is 0. It's 0-0.
I'm so sorry, 24/7 News team.
Jeff scored 0, and Queen What's-Her-Face scored 0. It's all down to the final question.
It's just like last time.
This is all.
A new fad is sweeping the nation, and it involves doing yoga with a farm animal. Which four-legged animal is being used in American yoga classes? Katie.
Goats?
Let's take a look at the tape. Goat yoga, which is exactly what it sounds like. Lotus poses and domesticated goats. But is it good for America or America's goats?
There is nothing inherently wrong with doing the downward dog pose next to a goat.
I love goats.
We have a winner.
Well, congratulations on really winning this time.
A genuine victory. We've reversed. There's the Eric Tucker mug.
From 0 to 1.
That's all for this week's final exam. Pay attention to the news each week, and you too can be a winner.
Right. We're all better off having seen that game. And